She doesn't even have a real job. She just plays house and calls it a career. My brother didn't whisper it, he said it loudly, the way people say things when they want everyone to hear but want to pretend it was just a comment between family. The backyard went quiet for exactly 1 second. Then my aunt laughed. Then my cousin laughed. Then my dad picked up his beer and nodded like my brother had just said something wise. My name is Sloane. Wait, I'm sorry, I go by my middle name now. Everyone who matters calls me Ren. I'm 31 years old, I'm the younger daughter. The one who went to art school when everyone thought I should go into finance. The one who moved to a different city when everyone thought I should stay close. The one who started a business out of her apartment and didn't tell us a single person in my family until the paperwork was already filed. I'd been home for 4 days for my grandmother's 80th birthday, 4 days of my mother asking if I was eating enough, 4 days of my brother explaining cryptocurrency to people who didn't ask, 4 days of everyone treating me like I was still 22 and figuring things out. I thought I could make it through the party without incident. I almost did. The man standing near the garden gate had been quiet all evening. I noticed him the way you notice someone who isn't trying to be noticed. Still, unhurried, watching the party like he was reading a document. He was my grandmother's neighbor's guest, someone had said. I hadn't thought anything of it, not until my brother made his little announcement, and I watched that man set down his glass very slowly and turn toward me with an expression I couldn't quite name. It wasn't pity. It was the look of someone who already knew something everyone else in that yard was about to find out. My brother's name is Garrett. He's 36. He works in commercial real estate, drives a car that costs more than my first apartment, and has been the family's golden child since approximately the moment he was born. Our mother used to introduce us at parties. This is Garrett. He's going to do something remarkable. Then she'd gesture at me. And this is Ren. She's creative. Creative was code for unfocused. Creative meant we're not sure what she's doing, but we're being polite about it. Garrett never missed an opportunity to sharpen that narrative. When I left for art school in Chicago, he told our cousins I was going to learn how to make ceramics. When I started freelancing after graduation, he asked at Thanksgiving if I'd looked into getting a real job. When I moved to Austin, he told my mother I was probably running away from something. I wasn't running away from anything, I was building something. But I'd learned early that telling my family that only made them ask more questions, and their questions had a way of making me feel like I had to justify myself in ways they never had to. So I stopped explaining. I just worked, and I let them believe whatever made them comfortable. The party was in my grandmother's backyard. String lights over the pergola, catered barbecue from the place she'd been going to for 40 years, family from 3 states who I hadn't seen since before the pandemic. It was warm and loud and generous the way her parties always were. My grandmother herself was holding court at the center of it all, wearing the yellow dress she'd bought for the occasion, laughing with her mouth open, the way only very happy people laugh. I was standing near the dessert table with a plate I hadn't touched when Garrett materialized beside me. "You look good," he said, and it was a compliment designed to sound like one while meaning the opposite, like he was surprised. "Thanks," I said. "How's the business?" He said, "Business the way you'd say hobby," with quotation marks you couldn't quite hear but absolutely felt. "Good," I said. "Really good, actually." He smiled. "Right, the content thing. It wasn't a content thing. But I knew that explaining it to him would only give him more material, so I said nothing. And then one of my dad's old colleagues came over to say hello, and Garrett, feeling the audience, leaned back and said it, casual, conversational. Like he was setting up a joke everyone already knew the punchline to. "She doesn't even have a real job. She just plays house and calls it a career." The colleague chuckled uncomfortably. My aunt, who had been walking by with a drink, laughed genuinely. My dad made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and acknowledgement. My mother, 2 tables away, smiled into her napkin. None of them told him to stop. The man by the garden gate didn't laugh. He turned and looked at me with that quiet, settled expression. And something about the steadiness of it made me feel, for the first time all evening, like I was standing on solid ground. People think humiliation is a single moment, a comment at a party, a joke at dinner. But it's not. It's 100 small moments that taught you to make yourself smaller without anyone having to ask. You learn it so gradually you stop noticing you're doing it. Growing up, I was the kid who drew on everything. Notebooks, receipts, the margins of homework. My mother thought it was sweet until it wasn't, until it became evidence that I wasn't serious. Garrett was serious. Garrett had a 5-year plan at 15. He knew what he wanted and he went after it without apology, and our family loved him for it in a way that felt like a language I'd never been taught. I wasn't jealous of him. I want to be clear about that. I just noticed the difference in how we were held. When Garrett made a mistake in his first job, our dad said, "That's how you learn." When I changed my major from graphic design to visual communication, which is essentially the same thing with better career applications, my mother cried for a weekend. I started my company 4 years ago, not a content thing, a brand development studio. I work with companies that are scaling, helping them build visual identity systems, pitch decks, investor materials, the kind of work that sits at the intersection of design and strategy. I'd spent 2 years freelancing, building a client list, learning what I was actually good at, before I ever filed the LLC paperwork. I didn't tell my family because I knew exactly what would happen. My mother would worry. Garrett would ask who my clients were so he could assess whether they were real. My dad would suggest I have a backup plan, and I would spend energy managing their anxiety instead of building my business. So I kept it quiet. I signed NDAs that required confidentiality about the companies I worked with. I lived below my means for longer than I needed to so I could reinvest. I had an accountant, a business attorney, and a roster of clients that included 3 companies most people in that backyard would recognize immediately. None of my family knew. The one person who did know was my grandmother. She'd asked me directly, 2 years ago, over the phone on a Sunday morning, "What are you actually doing, sweetheart? Not what everyone thinks. What are you actually doing?" And I told her, all of it. The studio name, the clients, the revenue, what I was building toward. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Good, now let them wonder." She'd never told anyone. I loved her for that more than I could say. I don't think my brother meant to start something at her 80th birthday party. I think he said what he said because he'd said versions of it so many times that it didn't register as cruelty anymore. It was just the shape of how our family talked about me. But the man by the garden gate had heard it, and he was no longer standing by the gate. Garrett was still talking. He'd warmed up to the crowd, the way he always did when he felt the room was with him. He was explaining now to my dad's colleague that some people just aren't built for structure. That it's fine to have a passion project, but you have to be realistic about what it is. My dad's colleague nodded carefully. I watched the man from the gate cross the yard. He moved without hurry. He stopped about 4 feet from our little group, and he waited. He didn't interrupt. He just waited, with the specific patience of someone who had done this before. Garrett finished his thought. There was a beat of polite silence, and then the man said, "I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to come say hello." He was talking to me. Garrett turned surprised. The man extended his hand to me first. "It's been a few months. How's the Hendrix rollout going?" And that was when I realized this was not going to be a small moment. Hendrix & Co. was one of my clients, a retail brand that had brought me in 18 months ago to rebuild their entire visual identity ahead of a Series B fundraising round. The work had taken 8 months. The round had closed successfully earlier this year. The details were under NDA. I had not mentioned this company to anyone in my family. I shook his hand. "Really well," I said. "The reception has been strong." He nodded, then glanced at Garrett in the way people glance at someone who has been talking too long. Not unkind, just clear. "Sorry," he said. "I don't think we've met. I'm Franklin. I'm on the Hendrix board. I'm actually here because your grandmother and my mother have been in the same garden club for 20 years. He smiled. Small world. Garrett said his name and offered his hand. Franklin shook it briefly and turned back to me. "The deck you built for the round was genuinely one of the clearest pieces of investor communication I've seen." The board was talking about it. We actually shared it internally as an example of how to do it right. Someone stopped walking nearby. I noticed because of the stillness. Garrett's colleague looked between us. My mother, who had drifted closer without my noticing, was very still. Garrett said nothing. His mouth was slightly open. Franklin continued, not performing, not raising his voice, just saying accurate things at a normal volume. "I think we tried to reach your studio about a follow-on project. Did that come through?" "It did," I said. "I'm reviewing the scope this week." He nodded. "Good. I'll make sure the right people are seen." He said his goodbyes, nodded to my grandmother across the yard, and walked away. The silence he left behind was enormous. I didn't look at Garrett right away. I looked at my grandmother. She was watching from her chair near the pergola, her yellow dress bright in the evening light. She raised her glass toward me, just a small lift, just enough. I finally stood. And then I said the thing I'd been keeping folded up inside me for a very long time. My hands were steady. I remember noticing that. 4 years of doing this alone and my hands were still steady. I didn't rush. I let the quiet do its work first. Then I said, I want to clear something up. Garrett made a sound like he was about to speak. I'm not playing house, I said. I run a brand development studio. I have 12 active clients. 3 of them are companies you would recognize if I named them, which I can't, because I signed confidentiality agreements. I did this on purpose, because I knew exactly how this family would respond if I told you, and I needed to build it without managing your opinions while I did. My mother said my name softly. I looked at her. You smiled, I said. When he said that, you smiled. She shook her head. Ren, I didn't mean. I know you didn't mean it to be what it was, I said. But that's what made it hard. It was never one big thing. It was 100 small things. And tonight was just the one that finally had a witness. Garrett said, okay, let's not make this into a whole. I'm not making it anything, I said. I'm just saying true things. You spent years telling people I wasn't serious. I was serious the whole time. You just weren't paying attention. My dad's colleague had quietly moved several feet away. I appreciated that. Garrett lowered his voice into something careful and urgent. You could have told us. We're your family. I tried to, I said, a long time ago. You called it a hobby. Mom asked if I had a backup plan. Dad asked who was going to insure me. And then I stopped trying, because building something actually requires energy and I was running out of it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at it briefly. A message from my attorney. The contract I'd been waiting on had come through. I showed no one the phone. I just let it buzz. But Garrett noticed. He always noticed when someone had information he didn't. What's that? He said. Business, I said. He stared at me the way you stare at someone when you're realizing, piece by piece, that you've been wrong about them for a long time and the realizing doesn't feel good. I didn't want him to feel bad. That surprised me. I thought I'd want him to feel exactly as small as he'd made me feel. But standing there, I mostly just felt tired of the whole architecture of it. The assumptions, the casual dismissals. The way my mother's smile had landed in my chest when I should have let it bounce off. I was tired of being someone's punchline, and tired of being quiet about being tired of it. I'm not doing this to embarrass you, I said. But I'm also not going to pretend tonight didn't happen. It happened. It's been happening. And I think it's time we're honest about that. Garrett looked at the ground. My mother reached out and touched my arm. This time it wasn't ownership. It was something closer to regret. I didn't know, she said, very quietly. That's the thing, I said. You didn't ask. My grandmother made her way over then, slower than she used to move, her cane clicking against the patio stones. She stopped beside me. She looked at Garrett for a long moment without saying anything. That look said everything that needed saying. Then she put her hand on my shoulder, leaned up, and kissed my cheek. Let's get some cake, she said, and I laughed. Actually laughed, because she has always known exactly when to end a scene. My brother followed me toward the side gate as I was getting some air, away from the cake and the lingering awkward silence, and the way certain relatives were suddenly very interested in the garden. Ren. His voice was different now, lower. The performance was gone. I stopped but didn't turn all the way around. You made me look like an idiot, he said. You made yourself look like an idiot, I said. I just didn't protect you from it, in front of Dad's colleagues, in front of Grandma's friends. Yeah, I said. In front of people. The way you did to me. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't think. I know, I said. That was the whole problem. He came to stand beside me instead of behind me. That felt like something, though I wasn't sure what. Is it actually going well, he said. The business, yes. Like really? Like really. He exhaled slowly. Why didn't you just tell me? I turned to look at him then. He looked tired. Not mean, which was the thing about Garrett. He wasn't a cruel person. He was just someone who had been so thoroughly convinced of his own version of the story that he'd never thought to check it. Because every time I tried to tell anyone anything I said, the first response was doubt. And I needed to believe in what I was building before I could survive anyone else's doubt. Does that make sense? He was quiet for a long time. Yeah, he said finally. I guess it does. We stood there for a minute without saying anything else. The party was still going behind us. I could hear my grandmother laughing at something. I could hear someone's kids running on the grass. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that's not enough, but it's a start," I said. "Not forgiveness, not yet, but a start." Inside, I heard my mother's voice, high and slightly brittle the way it got when she was upset, talking to my aunt. I knew she was processing. I knew tomorrow would bring a phone call I wasn't ready for. I knew this didn't get fixed in one evening under string lights with unfinished cake on the table. But I also knew something had shifted. Not dramatically, not permanently, but the way a door shifts when someone finally opens a window in a room that's been closed too long. Franklin caught my eye as I came back around the side of the house. He gave a small nod, professional, respectful, no performance. I nodded back. My grandmother was still at the center of the party in her yellow dress. She had lived 80 years, and she was going to dance to whatever they played next, and she was going to mean every step. I went and sat beside her. "Well," she said, without looking at me, watching the yard like she was watching a movie she'd already seen. "Well," I agreed. She patted my hand. "How long have you been waiting to say all that?" I thought about it. "About 4 years," I said. She nodded slowly. 4 years is about right. Any sooner and you wouldn't have had the proof. Any later and it would have been about anger. She picked up her fork. This way it was just facts. Facts are much harder to argue with. I looked at her. "You knew this was going to happen tonight." She smiled into her cake. "Franklin mentioned he might be here. I may have suggested he introduce himself to you." I laughed again. The real kind, the kind that comes from being surprised by someone you love. "Grandma," she lifted one shoulder. "You did the work. I just made sure the right person was in the yard." She was right, of course. That's the thing about people who've been paying attention their whole lives. They know that the truth doesn't need to be manufactured. It just needs the right moment to stop being invisible. I did the work. Quietly, consistently, without applause or acknowledgement or anyone's belief in me except my own. I built something real while my family built a story about me that was easier than looking closely. I was never a hobby. I was never unfocused. I was never background. I was just building somewhere they couldn't see, and when the light finally reached it, even I was surprised by how much there was. The next family gathering was 2 months later, at Thanksgiving. My brother was quieter. My mother had called twice. The second call had lasted almost 2 hours, and at the end of it she'd cried, and then I'd cried, and we hadn't solved anything but we'd said things that had needed to be said for a decade. My dad shook my hand when I walked in. Not a hug. My dad is not a hugger, but a handshake firm and deliberate, with eye contact that meant something he didn't know how to say out loud yet. Garrett passed the bread to me first. It was a small thing. He just picked it up and handed it to me before anyone asked. But I noticed. And I think he knew I noticed, and in our family, in the particular language of people who show things sideways instead of straight on, that meant something. Franklin sent a message the Monday after the party to confirm the follow-on project. We started in January. The work was good, the kind that stretched me in the right ways. By February, 2 of the board members had referred me to other companies. I didn't tell my family about those referrals. Not because I was hiding anything anymore, but because some things still belong to you before they belong to the story. My grandmother turned 80 and she is still in her garden club, and she still has parties, and she still knows exactly when to end a scene. And I stopped shrinking. Not all at once. Not without effort. But one evening in a backyard in August, with cake on the table and string lights going dim, I said out loud who I actually was. And the truth, it turned out, had been waiting a long time to be introduced.